Sometimes in life, you get reminders of how far you've come and that you should never take it for granted. I've had 3 reminders recently. Last month, one of my jobs got on the front cover of Build It magazine. Then, my practice was included in Urban Realm magazine's top 100 architects in Scotland. And while I was taking it all in, this photo popped up in my social feed. That's me, age 21, in Sydney. I'm now 42, so the photo was taken half a lifetime ago. This stopped me dead in my tracks and made me think. That year, when I was 21, was probably the most consequential one in my life. Let me explain why. One thing I don't want people to think when watching my videos is that I've somehow always been destined to do this kind of work. I worry that because I now do high quality designs, that it must have been obvious from the start I would end up here. And it wasn't. It really wasn't. The truth is that I struggled a lot and I almost quit architecture. Why I stayed in this profession isn't just relevant to architects. We live in a world where people share so much of their lives in social media. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that anyone who is doing well right now must always have been marked for success. You might then go on to believe that because you aren't doing well right now, that things will never change. And that's not true. Social media is terrible for this. It rewards highly edited snapshots of people's lives because mundane day-to-day reality just isn't as interesting. And this can lead people to feel hopeless. If you are struggling at the beginning of your career, maybe you're wondering if you made the right choice, then I hope you can learn from my experience. You see, for 3 years before that photo was taken, I had been studying architecture at university and I wasn't enjoying it. Now, don't get me wrong, I was having a great time socially, but I was burning the candle at both ends and, in all likelihood, I was suffering from depression. I could not find motivation, I did not understand what my tutors expected from me, and I was struggling to pass my exams. In my 3rd year, I made up my mind that architecture wasn't for me. I would finish my studies, get my bachelor's degree, and move on. The problem was, I had no clear idea what I would move on to. I had vaguely thought about graphic design, but I hadn't done anything about it. Now, to understand this story, it's important to know how architecture is taught in the UK. Students usually do 3 years before graduating with a bachelor's degree, then they spend 1 year working in an architect's office to gain experience, before returning to university to study for 2 more years to get their final degree. That year spent working between 2 university degrees is often called the year out. So while I was wondering what to do with my life after leaving architecture, all my friends were talking about getting their placement for their year out. While this was going on, I had a random conversation with one of my classmates, a guy called James. He had an aunt and uncle in Sydney, they had a big house, no kids, and had asked him to come to Australia to do his year out. He didn't know I was thinking about quitting at the time, and he suggested I join him and a few others on the trip of a lifetime. Now, I had gone straight from school to university. I'd been in full-time education for 13 years at this point. I had no clue what I wanted to do with my life, so I said yes. I would go to Oz, but in my mind, I would get a job in a bar and spend the year thinking about what to do next. It wasn't a bad plan as such, but when we got to Australia, it turned out working in a bar required a license to serve alcohol, and this wasn't quick or easy to get. I had a portfolio of my student work and my CV, so in order to make money and pay the bills, I decided to get a job in an architect's office. The mistake I made was accepting the first offer that came along. Initially, I thought I had done well. The firm was based in a skyscraper in the city centre. They focused on large urban design jobs, but the boss was an elderly architect and he needed someone who could use CAD to draft his pet projects. Now, I had been trained to use AutoCAD and was hired on the strength of that alone. The old guy literally offered me the job over the phone when I said I knew how to use CAD. Remember, this was 2001 and computer-aided design had only been in widespread use for about a decade at that point. Older architects back then had no idea how to draw using a computer. It turned out the firm used Vectorworks, a drafting program I had never heard of, and the boss didn't understand the difference. All the other staff were urban planners, so no one could help me. I remember sitting on a beach reading a massive user manual and sleeping on the office floor in order to meet deadlines. Now, the view from that office was amazing, but my first experience of working in architecture was awful. I resigned after 3 months. I seriously considered flying home right then, but it was winter in the Northern Hemisphere, so I spent time enjoying the Australian sunshine and the lifestyle. I bought a surfboard and I learned to ride it. I got up at dawn every day while my housemates went out to work in the city. But when they came home in the evenings, talking about the projects they'd been working on, I began to wonder if I should give architecture one more go. So this time I went job hunting with a purpose. I took my time, interviewed at several firms, and eventually found a small practice above a furniture showroom. There were 2 other partners, 1 student, and me. We worked on alterations and extensions to suburban homes, boutique shops, restaurants, and one-off houses. I got to meet clients, contractors, and consultants, but most of all, I saw the lifestyle of a small architecture practice, and for the first time, I could see myself fitting in. I learned to survey buildings, draw construction details, produce 3D renderings, organise the sample library, and take notes at meetings. This was nothing like architecture school, and I loved it. I learned a lot from those 2 experienced architects. They were open about the finances of the firm, took their time to teach me important skills that I still use to this day. We worked on some cool projects, and I still incorporate elements of this architectural style in my own work. Now, in the middle of all this, 2 of my housemates fell out with James and I, and they ran off to live together. We couldn't afford the rent, so James and I had to move to a smaller place, but we made the most of it. Around the same time that happened, I developed crippling headaches and had to get an MRI scan. The doctors took 2 very long weeks to diagnose the problem. I still have those MRI scans and remember the feeling of dread that it might be something serious. In the end, it turned out to be a rare form of sinusitis, which cleared up on its own. My work paid me about 25,000 Australian dollars, which isn't very much. Back then it worked out at about £9,000 sterling, or about £15,000 in today's money, but it was enough to pay the rent, have a few beers at the weekend, and save to go backpacking for a couple of months. For the first time in my life, I learned how to budget. The architects I worked for offered to sponsor me for a visa to remain in Australia, but instead I chose to return to the UK to complete my architectural education. Now, going through all this 10,000 miles from home at 21 years of age was a lot to deal with. It was the first time I paid my own way in the world, earning a living and not depending on my parents. Despite setbacks, I discovered that I might actually enjoy a career in architecture. I had a fire lit under me and worked hard as a result. To everyone's surprise, including my own, I graduated near the top of my year. I also learned the value of friendship. James and I are still close. We were best men at each other's weddings and both became self-employed architects around the same time. We still regularly catch up to talk about life and work. 2 decades later, when we can find the time, James and I still go surfing. The ocean has given me gifts I can't possibly hope to repay. It taught me the value of persistence, that something worth doing is never easy, just like being an architect. So what can my experience teach others? First off, it's possible to find a niche in your work that you might enjoy, but you will need to use your network. Ask your friends and colleagues for help. Second, get a mentor, someone who has already found their niche, and learn from them. Take chances, don't be afraid to be wrong, and try different things. If you're already thinking of quitting, what's the harm in doing something totally new and unexpected? Cut the dead wood. If you have colleagues or friends who are holding you back, cut them loose. It may not be your job that's the problem, it might actually be the people. And finally, don't give up. It gets better, I promise. My name is Neil, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. That really helps the channel. I regularly make videos about altering and extending private homes, as well as videos like this one about the reality of the architecture profession and the construction industry. If you like the sound of that, subscribe to the channel to keep up to date.